So just want to check, is that have voice?
Hello everyone, I'm Chien-Tzu.
Is that voice
I
normal?
major in graphic design and my final major project is called Awareness. This project aims to discuss the relationship between artificial light and visual language. Artificial light changes a human's life. The world before it, humans follow the nature rhythm. We woke up when the sun rises, slept when the sun setting. However, the artificial light started to change the rhythm. The daytime has been extended by it. People started work at night. I think electric light created a new environment for people because before the invention of electric light, people used gaslight and candles to light up space. However, the electric light has various colors which provides more ways we see things. They are not only focused on lighting things, meanwhile, they were also used on communicating and changing our senses. These lights became other formats exist in our life. For example, the machines we rely on nowadays, like cameras, phones, or computers, involve everywhere in our life. We design media on computer. In other words, we design light on light. The relationship between electric light and us are really interesting. So in this project, I want to focus on electric light. And also, John Berger, an English artist, mentioned one sentence. We never look at just one thing. We are always looking at the relation between things and ourselves. I think this quote outlines the idea of my topic because the relations between things and ourselves are perceptions. I want to explore the relation between electric light and space and started with the two questions. How does the electric light communicate with vision in reality? What is the relation between them and us? So, in this project, I will focus on electric light through our daily life and bring different experience to the spectators. The first part of my research is design context. In this section, I explore more about how these artists visualize and conceptualize the reality through electric light. The first project is from Olafur Eliasson, Your Blue-Orange After Image Exposed. The projectors of the work project break orange light. When the light pulses, the eyes create a blue after image. The project inspired me to think about a new connection between electric light and us, because the light is being projected on the wall, but when it pulsed, the after image made us become the projector as well. I was thinking, is the electric light creating a new reality for us, or are we creating a new reality for ourselves? The questions about reality also been mentioned by American artist Chien-Tzu. In 2019, I went to visit his immersive installation in Berlin. It's called Toour. In this work, those visitors cannot find the lighting source, also cannot define the scale of this space. Because the light he projects to space makes the spectators lose the sensory of distance. People lose the direction and even cannot measure the depth of the room. The viewpoints of them help me to grasp a clear direction for my topic, because their works encourage visitors to try to think about the concept behind the way we see things. It could create another aspect of awareness. The next part of my research is whiteboard context. In this section, I want to know more about the electric light from different fields. I focus on 3 different fields, which is sociology, philosophy, and psychology. And in this presentation, I want to share 2 key research that supports my final outcomes. Many scientists explore how surroundings change our physical experience. One of the iconic examples is Field experiment. The participants of the experiment are exposed to a visual and auditory stimulation field, which cause illusion. The participants' eyes covered by goggles, which block out the strong light, and ears covered by headphones play with noise. Most of participants have hallucination during the process. They hear a human voice or seeing pictures during the process. The process of the experiment relates to my topic in the psychology field because it is using light as a tool to lead the participant to experience different surroundings. It inspired me to think about the experience of different lighting could build an illusion and change our sensation towards an object. There's a way where people connect the light to a certain location, situation, or even time. Throughout history, electric light sources have evolved from the first light bulb to where fluorescent lamp become a commonly used object to illuminate home in the Western world. For instance, a club in London is called Dr. Kluger's Old Town Tavern. Use this light method to recreate a surrounding of 1980s night and have become a popular tool of travel back in time. Based on my research, I want to use this aspect of changing reality and even transporting people to a place they can connect with certain emotions. The information let me realize that electric light already cannot separate with modern days. It also helped me to build my concept from several subjects. For my research method, I went to Olafur Eliasson's exhibition, which is called In Real Life, and also I did some experiments about the electric light. In Real Life is an exhibition with light installation at Tate Modern. There's an installation called Room for One Color, which is focused just only use one color light to narrow down perception so that people can see the spectrum between yellow and black. I was inspired by this approach because I noticed that all the colors disappear, which makes the visitor become a crucial part of this installation. My first approach is visitors' awareness about light influence their perspective. The second part is based on my 2 experiments. For the first experiment, I wrote some text on white paper with various color pencils as my subject to observe, and used the color light to illuminate the paper. When I used blue light to illuminate the paper, the blue text disappeared. Equally, red text disappeared when I using red light. The text disappeared in my vision, but I still know it is on the paper. However, if we don't know the text is there in the beginning, can we still be aware that what we see is true or not? The experiment built my thinking process and also let me think about the possibility to adapt this idea to my project. Another experiment is how the light responds to an object or a surface and how the material is influenced by it. I went to the material room in Shepherd Library and learned various materials like different types of acrylic, mirrors, and glass. I lighted them to find out how the light creates a different atmosphere or effects through this media. At the beginning of my project, I was thinking to use the video to present this topic, but throughout the process, I'll find out an immersive platform will be a better outcome. Because compared with a video, the spectators will be more involved when something can be interactive with them. I want to let them become part of the creators in this platform. So in this part of my research, I focus on different user interface and user experience of different websites. This section is my project production. It's a mock-up video for my interactive platform. The platform is divided into 5 topics, which is based on different parts of my research. There are co-creators, celebration, concealed light, non-entity, and approachable world. And the project is still processing, so the video is not really complete yet. And this is my project. Thank you for your listening.
That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you. I think as the comments are coming up in the chat that we're all mesmerized. Such beautiful work to see. Thank you. I sort of feel like everyone could just kind of settle down and keep watching that for a couple more hours. It's lovely. So thank you so much. So we're now moving on to Luke. And again, if you're not speaking, if you could turn off your camera. So Luke, whenever you are ready.
Hello.
Hi.
That was really cool.
It's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, I'll try and share. Okie dokie. Is that working? Can everyone see that? Okay.
Yes, we can see it.
Hi, I'm Luke. I'm an experimental animator, and I enjoy making films that try to reveal or represent subjective human experiences. So these are some clips from my third year film, which is in progress, which is about the experience of autopilot in life. And I kind of didn't know what genre to kind of define this under, so I kind of thought it might be some kind of experimental documentary because it uses live action footages and it's based on real life. So I thought for my dissertation, I might look into that. I wasn't really sure if it was a genre, but turns out it kind of is, and it bends what you think of as truth in media. Apologize for the angle of the camera, by the way, it's at the bottom of my computer. So yeah, to be honest, coming out of this research, I had a lot more questions than answers, but I do have a few interesting things that I thought I could share and maybe a new perspective. So to start looking at traditional documentary and what that is, it's a widely trusted form of filmmaking. It often relies on live action footage and a seemingly hands-off approach to kind of demonstrate to you that what you see on screen is how things truly exist. Phil Nichols has a great quote about this. He notes that there is indeed a distinctive bond between a photographic image and that of which it is a record. And indeed, it's kind of, those two things are intrinsically linked, what we think is true and film. But of course, documentary is not without human interference, framing, editing, sound design, direction, pacing. You could argue that all these pieces of human interference corrupt potentially the truth of the image. It'd be hard to even pick up a camera and not say that you're somehow corrupting some element of truth of what you're filming, but it's an accepted part of documentary practice that it's inherently constructed. But beyond that, in an age where visual effects make it hard to tell anyway what is real and what is man-made, I found that it's important to kind of re-establish critical thinking when it comes to visual documents of reality. And this may also open up the door for experimental film to be considered in some way visualizations of reality or some form of hybrid documentary. One of the questions I was asking when I started my research is what is real that you can't show with a film camera? It's quite a loaded question. But an important term to get out the way would be indexical. This often came up in my research. And in this sense, indexical describes the existential link between an object and a copy of that object. It's kind of a difficult definition, at least for me. So this is an example. You could say that this, a photo of a butterfly has an indexical trace of that butterfly in that the photons of light hit it and then come into a camera and you get this trace from nature. So then a comparison, do these offer different truths? One is the picture of the butterfly and one is a frame from Decasia, which is one of my case studies. It's a found footage film by Bill Morrison in 2002. I was asking whether whether one offers something that the other does not. Does one represent reality in a certain way that the other can't or doesn't? And equally here, my second case study, which I won't look at as much, but I thought I'd bring it up. Earthworks, an installation by the artistic duo Semiconductor. It visualizes seismograph data using CG on a big wall. So again, does this installation show something that maybe this seismograph doesn't? It's an interesting question. It's quite hard to answer, but I've got some interesting things from it. So first, looking at Decasia, this is what it looks like. It's quite interesting. It's a found footage film by Bill Morrison in 2002. The reason it looks like this is it's made of old decaying pieces of nitrate-based film stock from the silent movie era that Morrison pieced together. He didn't create any of this footage. He didn't shoot any of it. It was found in archives. So he just edited it together and then got a custom musical score to go along with it. It's quite long. You can recommend watching it if you feel like it. But yeah, when researching this film, it was almost always labeled found footage, avant-garde, experimental, collage film. But looking into it more, I kind of realized that, you know, this is a hands-off approach. There's no, there's very little interference from Morrison himself. He found the footage and then edited it together. He didn't create any of the visuals himself. And it is arguable that beyond the fact that this is archive footage itself, the film is a record of the passage of time through the decay of the nitrate-based film stock itself. It offers an unobstructed angle at the decay of the film reel. And again, the data on screen is from nature, and the decay may become a document of its material, which is an interesting maybe way to look at this kind of experimental film. Morrison has a quote himself. He would agree. He sees several layers of reality in his film, and although the director's view maybe shouldn't be taken with too much value in this case, I think it's arguable that his film can definitely be seen in this way, and yet it is also avant-garde cinema. It looks experimental, and yet he's taken two indexical phenomena here. He's taken the indices of and the trace of the people on the film, and the trace from the material decaying itself. So yeah, it's kind of a document in that sense. And discussions of Decasia often posit that its value is in its materiality, its reflexivity, the fact that it knows and shows what it is made of. This kind of hypermediacy can be lost in traditional documentary, where the camera is seen as an invisible window into people's lives, unbiased and unnoticed. This presented an issue to me, at least. How could this art film tick all these documentary boxes? So to try and clarify this dilemma, I looked into documentary history, and I'll briefly touch on some big points here. Turns out that documentary film and avant-garde cinema have a kind of crossed history. They come from similar roots. People like Dziga Vertov, who was an early Russian filmmaker, he was somewhat radical in his day for being against theatrical filmmaking. He was interested in filming regular life and ordinary people. And Vertov helped inspire the cinema verite movement in the 1960s, which again was looking at truth in cinema, but was seen as radical and somewhat experimental. And examples of radicals and artists defining documentary film's history is fairly commonplace. There seems to be a big mix, a common search for truth. And exploring truth in new ways is very much a part of experimental and documentary film's history. And so in a sense, although they are different genres of filmmaking, documentary and experimental film should perhaps not be seen as polar opposites. Avant-garde artists, alongside new developing technology like portable video cameras, CGI, it can break and already have broken new ground in visualizing technology. But visualizing reality. But I found that an interesting example of this new blend, new territory, comes in an example that often comes up in my research. BBC documentary series Walking with Dinosaurs from 1999, which follows the lives of prehistoric dinosaurs in cutting-edge CG, at least what was cutting edge at the time. I watched this as a kid, as I'm sure many other students did, and I was amazed at the time at how realistic the dinosaurs looked. I knew they were real. They weren't real, sorry. I knew they weren't real, and yet I trusted the program all the same. Walking with Dinosaurs is actually often brought up in the documentary theory community as an example of how modern technology has blended the bounds between reality and documentary filmmaking, or fiction and documentary filmmaking, excuse me. The dinosaurs you see on screen are shot and animated as if they are being filmed, but they aren't. It's a fabrication. The mechanics of their movement and visual design are, of course, based in science, but they're not captured from nature. They're crafted in a computer. This does bring about ethical questions. Should something presented as truth be labeled if it is fabricated? I mean, it's fairly obvious that the BBC didn't get real dinosaurs for this series, but what if in another case it isn't obvious? This is a danger as visual technology becomes more and more refined and prevalent and integrated into everyday filmmaking and media. So sort of towards the conclusion, research into Decasia and earthworks perhaps posits a solution, or at least part of a solution to this issue: hypermediacy, the act of reminding the viewer what medium they are looking at. If in Walking with Dinosaurs, a brontosaurus was at some point cut in half for a moment, revealing its animation skeleton to the audience, it might have been considered less controversial. Reflexivity may allow documentary to harness a kind of humanistic reality and authenticity that connects with the audience more directly. And then Decasia, back to Decasia, even though I don't think of Decasia as a documentary, I think it's a good example of a film that's translucent, and it shows off some of its parts, in doing so, giving us as an audience more tools to discern the truth hidden somewhere within. It helped me realize just how much of our visual media is opaque and constructed. And for an experimental film to be so reflexive, I think other media should take note, especially media that purports to tell the truth. And of course, this is an artistic interpretation of the truth, which is something I'm very much interested in, as long as it's somewhat transparent and you know what you're looking at, which in this case, you are. But mainly I've also been reminded of the importance today of being critical with the media we consume and aware of what kind of reality we're being sold. So yeah, that's kind of the conclusion of my presentation. Yeah, thanks for listening. I'm not sure if I was under or over time.
Wonderful. No, Luke, you're absolutely perfect. Thank you so much. That was fascinating, really enjoyable, and you've already got some interesting comments coming up in the chat. I think, yeah, they definitely we slipped about there between the realness or not of the dinosaurs. That was enjoyable. And already some kind of good thematic overlaps coming up, as well as some interesting kind of visual resonances that I'm sure we'll get to. So next we have Victoria, now looking at rescue strategies for old buildings, and this is one that is pre-recorded. So I am going to share my screen, and do let me know in the chat if there are any issues here.
Hi everyone, today I'd like to discuss a broadened theme of reuse of old buildings. In my presentation, I will focus on rescue strategies for abandoned buildings that were left to die slowly. We will look at ruins and analyze their perfect incompleteness. We will compare buildings to living organisms, and we will look at how old buildings can be reimagined and their afterlife through rehabilitation and adaptation. To begin with, I would like to define two types of obsolescence in architecture. Incremental obsolescence that happen detail by detail, and sudden obsolescence that happen when a building that intended to be occupied is never used. An example of this can be the phenomenon of ghost cities. For instance, China's largest abandoned city, Ordos, which is a newly built 1 million people city that today is missing something crucial: citizens. A city with its own airport, stadium, shopping centers, and contemporary museum is completely unoccupied. Nowadays, designers and architects express their visions through the construction of new buildings, which automatically displace and question the future of all historical buildings within the context of the city. Even if we are going towards everything that is new and modern, subconsciously we'll still replicate the elements of the past. So maybe there is a way we can express our vision and creativity in a more sustainable way and consider buildings that already exist and surround us. Let's start to look at ruins. Fragile and delicate, at the same time strong, solid, and protective. There's something special and charming about them that new contemporary buildings will never be able to replicate. Once a building is left to decay, it becomes vulnerable, exposed, and transparent. Its transparency can be explained by the barrenness of features and components such as joints, bricks, alignment, and cracks that were damaged and broke into pieces. And there's a nice quote saying that all buildings can reveal as much information as historical documents. Later additions, erosion of surfaces, and the patina of age say much about how the building has been used and what has happened to it. The incompleteness of a ruin is strongly associated with the nature of our lives and the universe. All events and processes continuously change into something, and the same thing happens with buildings. The idea of incompleteness and imperfection was reflected in art, poetry, architecture, and influenced people's lifestyle and behavior. For instance, wabi-sabi, which means rustic, weathered, is a Japanese concept which values imperfections, incompleteness, and denies everything polished, refined, and trendy. Therefore, the concept of wabi-sabi can be attributed to the essence of a reuse of all buildings, and particularly the essence of a ruin. Following from this concept, we can see how Dovecourt Design Studio, which was designed by Howard Tompkins, is a successful example of the integration of modern additions into the ruin of an old Victorian house, whose upper partition fell apart during a strong storm in 1970. At the early stage of the design, the team faced two options for the ruin. They could complete the missing parts to recreate the appearance of the old building, or leave the structure as it is and allocate the new structure within the perimeter of the existing ruin, which is the option they chose. The structure was prefabricated locally and assembled on site into the ruin that was balanced and sustained in advance. Moreover, to preserve the ruin's natural decaying mechanism, the vegetation and plants which were growing over the ruins were left intact. For the main finish, the team opted for corten weathered steel, which matches the appearance of existing rusting red bricks. So this is an example of a sustainable way of designing and approaching ruins. And the next strategy is buildings as living organisms. So the human body can be seen as a well-programmed machine that operates based on complex processes and reacts to its surroundings. Similarly to our bodies, buildings undergo processes that make them be considered as living organisms. Buildings breathe, and they have thermal properties the same as our body has, for example, absorbing and emitting heat. Walls protect and preserve their fragile interior from damage and harm, the same as our skin protects our body. They bones are bricks and surfaces, which, once connected to the other parts of a building, form joints. The way we describe spaces is strongly related to the way we might describe ourselves. By using words such as skeleton of a building, organic shape, the heart of a building, we subconsciously make parallels to our bodies. Nowadays, people equip houses with the latest technologies, systems that are built to self-run, regulate their temperature, air humidity, lighting, and so on. Buildings have a strong potential to speak and accumulate memories of certain events, feelings, and emotions. Different buildings have a different way of speaking to us. Their voice can be loud, sharp, calm, and soft, or sometimes their voice is very weak or absent at all. For instance, an abandoned church that was vandalized will have a different voice from a newly refurbished house or an old library. There is a possibility that all of these voices are our inner voice, and we perceive a building from scanning our bodies and minds. An example of a building which has elements of a living organism is the Titan Brewing Academy by the Marco Casagrande, which is a refurbishment of a Taiwanese sugar factory. The creation of the Brewing Academy can be described as a natural experiment that shows how we can habitat space without interfering with the natural biological cycles of a building. It is also an illustration of the third-generation city, architectural theory which is based on the idea of organic cities. The territory of a building is used for educational workshops and sessions. It has multiple gardening areas with wild vegetation. Plants are watered naturally by rainwater and receive a generous amount of natural light. The water is also stocked in water tanks for irrigation purposes. The main materials used throughout the space for the flooring are wood and earth, so that people can walk bare feet and feel closer to nature and their natural living environment. So, moving on, the last strategy, Remagen spaces. Authors of the book Building Must Die suggest that death is an essential and inevitable thing for buildings, and buildings transition from one life to another due to the rescue strategies that architects undertake. They're also quoting that very often architects see their role in anthropomorphic terms as performing surgery, breathing new life into restoring the soul and the heart of elderly buildings. Therefore, an architect or a designer has an immense power to change the life of a building, or simply avoid their death, and doing so can grant them great dignity. It might be possible that a new chapter in the life of a building starts with a dream, a new plot which can create out of all elements. Reuse of buildings is also compared to a palimpsest, which is an inscribed surface from which one text has been removed so that space could be used again for another. No matter how we erase things, the traces and marks of the past will still be visible. La Fábrica project by Ricardo Bofill is an example of an old, obsolete building that was reimagined and massively changed by being habituated. The factory is located in Barcelona, and it was a cement factory in its previous life. The refurbishment of a building took 2 years, and the process was extremely complex. In some areas, it involved jackhammers and dynamite. Preserving a huge tank in the middle of a living room became a feature element, same as staircase that goes nowhere, or concrete columns that support nothing. The architects also decided to plant vegetation and create a multitude of gardens which softens the appearance of a brutal concrete aesthetic and imply to the exterior more of a domestic feeling. Therefore, the inhabitation process is a result of a strong connections which we have with the space we live in. Our homes absorb almost on DNA level information about us, reflecting our visions, habits, and emotions. Today, La Fabrica is a flagship studio for Ricardo Bofill's architectural practice called RBTA. People around the world are coming to visit the area and to celebrate the power of a building which once was abandoned and unloved. It is an example of how much effort, process, and courage it takes for a building to be reimagined and to be reborn. Looking at the discussed strategies, it is possible to identify certain similarities. For instance, the La Fabrica project deploys the ruin strategy. Parts of a structure have been retained, but no longer serve their primary purpose. And both examples insert modern additions into the ruins of an old building. The Ruin Academy project illustrates the image of a third-generation city. This can also be observed in La Fabrica, suggesting that the building's industrial past was transformed into an organic ruin. And in conclusion, even if there are so many other strategies for the reuse of old buildings, these examples provide an opportunity to take a deeper look into the root problem, obsolescence, and abandonment. The concept of a building as a living organism is fundamental for projects discussed previously, as well as our homes and spaces we occupy on a daily basis. This can help us change our perceptions and how we interact with old spaces. We, architects and designers, have a big responsibility. By saving a building, we're not only supporting the efficient use of resources, but we are also preserving our past for future generations. So thanks everybody for your time and interest in the subject. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Wow, thank you so much, Victoria. These are very transporting papers. I feel we're kind of going on amazing journeys. Those were beautiful photographs. Really, really enjoyed the different locations that you took us to there. So thank you. So yeah, we're moving on now. Our next paper is Yu-Ting. So if you're happy to share your screen.
Yeah. Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. And I'm Yu-Ting, and I'm just graduated from BA Fine Arts Social Practice in Middlesex. And I'm going to talk about the project that I'm currently working on, which is 1000 Tahun, the 1,000-year project. 1000 Tahun means 1,000 year in Malay, and the reason that I use Malay is because I'm from Malaysia and Malay is our national language, and I hope to bring this project back to my home country after I finish my degree here. So the 1,000-year project, the reason that it's called the 1,000-year project is because plastic takes at least 1,000 years to decompose, and my project is mainly focused on working on how art can play a role in like changing the environment using non-recyclable plastic mainly, and not just thrown away into like landfill. So I did a lot of research on what can I do using plastic, and most of the artists that I found, like there's a lot of artists that use waste or like plastic to create artworks, but most of them are like create installations or sculptures using waste, and unless it's collected or is saleable, the work will just be thrown away after it has been shown like once. And this is not what I aim for. I aim to like introduce some methods to the people and to raise awareness while offering strategies that can be shared and passed on. So when I exploring like plastic packaging, I found out that the main categories in the plastic packaging in UK is not recyclable, checked locally, and widely recycled. So like obviously like not recycled means that plastic packaging that can't be recycled, and checked locally you have to like check whether your area accept that kind of plastic packaging, and widely recycled is that plastic packaging that can be recycled. So this shows even like more to how much waste that we have consumed, but that little that can be recycled. So I've discovered like the process that I can cut the plastic packaging and fold it into like cubes and put it together and put it into stripes and circles and more circles. And after that I put it together and you can make it into like a solid container, then a bag. This is the final object that I made like through my research and like experiment. So after I found out how to make usable things using plastic packaging, I realized that just do it by myself won't have that much impact. So in order to have more impact and really like spread it to the public, I think workshop is a good way to let people know about this technique and really like use it at home and to reduce the amount of waste that go into the landfill. So an opportunity came out when through the university's education liaison and outreach team with the Unitas Youth Center that I can have a workshop there with the children. So I had a 4-session workshop there to like teach them how to make the bag using plastic packaging. When I visited the area, like visited the youth center, I found out that there's a lot of like crisp packet and plastic packaging in the bin. So that will be the material that we use to make the bag. So the age group that I work with, that I had the workshop with is the junior group. So it's 8 years old to 12 years old. And I taught them how to cut the plastic packaging and make into bag and make it easier for them by creating the template and letting them like to follow the template to cut it. And they, after like cutting steps, is like they fold it and put it together into a stripes. But because some steps, like for this step, is a bit tricky for the younger one, and some prefer to do the cutting and folding. So like they separate into like different groups. Like some of them they do the cutting and folding, some of them they put it together. And this session operated as a like drop-in group. So actually the children, they came in and out the workshop, but still like some of them they very engaged and they stay with every workshop like every time. And like after they put it together, they sew it together with the wool, and yeah, this is the bag they made. And like, even though like they came in and out, but still like they managed to finish them, and they really enjoy the process and they like it very much. And I gave them the template that I made to let them to bring home to share with their family, and they can like keep doing it even that is the workshop has finished. And yeah, this is the picture of the bag. So after this, for the degree show, actually, like initially I planned to do a installation in the studio with the objects that I made with plastic packaging to demonstrate how reusing plastic waste in like this way can be productively like reused in home. But because of the lockdown, I decided to do it at my flat. So these are the few items that I made using the plastic packaging. The first one is like the bean curtains that I installed it at my room, and beans that can be used as basket, like yeah, and pillow, and maybe like even cup holder and necklace. So for this, I've taken like a quick video of the steps, like the process of making the objects. So I will share it to you now. So you cut it into like rectangle and fold it into cubes, then you put it together. So like with this step, you put it into like a circle in order to combine it and make it into like a bag. This is to make the base for the bag. And you use like wool to connect them together. But actually for this making things is it's quite easy after you like know the ways to do it. So the reason that I focus on this part is because I wish that people can, after they learn these techniques, they can do it at home and they can make like different things instead of like buying new things. They can use waste like plastic packaging that we really can't avoid consuming it, because we can always get it every time we buy like crepes or like food packaging. So that through these techniques, you can really like do it at home. Yes, so after you get the base, and connect together. Yeah, so this is the end product, and I will bring this project with me together back to my home country, and like maybe work with the organization in my area, and even like work online with online workshops or other disciplines like fashion design, architecture maybe, because I think that it can expand and do in like many different kind of items and different things. Yeah, so this is my sharing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Those are such great instructional videos. I think that was coming in the chat as well. Just really, really mesmerizing to watch, and yeah, loads of questions I think for everybody about the project overall, but well done, that was great. And quite interesting now, because we're going on to Megan Wallace. Hi, how you doing? And it's quite interesting going from kind of making and recycling and reuse, and we're now going into punk, so intriguing to see if there are any connections there. So basically, whenever you're ready to share your screen and present, have you got pre-recorded, or have you just got present?
Yeah, I pre-recorded it. I'm not
okay, great. So whenever you're ready.
Thank you. My project's about punk, and I've just focused on the fashion section for this presentation.
Is there sound, Megan?
We're not hearing anything at the moment.
You've turned your mic.
Yeah, with that.
I think what you should do
is an iconic. Sorry.
I think there was then, yeah.
I think we heard it then. I think you muted your microphone.
Yeah, but there is often confusion surrounding the minority group and what the punk movement really meant, especially with the growing world issues and lack of media coverage that attempts to connect with the working class. It is important to understand what made punks so successful in being noticed, yet whether it was the subculture itself or their wrongful representation from others that caused a dislike from society. And I think their fashions give a great insight. When looking at the fashions of punks wearing safety pins, studs and leather, I see a unique way to express oneself. However, within the media, this was described as a stunt of violence through visual expression. The rips and tears translated as aggressive and threatening, thereby creating a level of fear amongst the older generations, whilst as a youth myself, I can resonate with the misjudgment that can have occurred by the way one dresses. It is obvious that the way they dress was a political stance, and the bolder imagery such as swastikas was a blatant desire to shock and confront rather than to associate with right-wing organisations. However, I also think there was a desire to be different. The swastika used to be connected to Buddhism and was a symbol of luck until Nazis used it during the Second World War and changed its association and meaning completely, suggesting that if the original punks knew its connection to Buddhism, they could have symbolised their peaceful movement knowingly, whilst punks who joined later and were unaware would have adopted the Nazi ideology of violence and disruption. The punks used this visual confrontation, counter-attacking with musical lyrics such as No Future and Destroy Everything Now, choosing to attack establishment with images and words through a peaceful approach in comparison to physical violence, contrary to publication stance. The physical violence, however, still existed in bands' live performances. During these concerts, the punk bands would hurt themselves with broken glass, spit on their audience, and encourage them to throw what was available to them onto the stage. As much as this was extremely violent, their audiences resonated and understood that them hurting themselves physically is a visual metaphor for what the government has done to abuse the economical and societal structure rooted more specifically in the working classes. It can be argued that these ideas of atrocious behaviour were in fact representations set by the media anyhow, because the media machine with its omnipresent smattering of slogans and bumper sticker ideology still exerts powers and influence. The way Barthes deconstructs the meaning of how advertisers are refined through a semiotic approach supports his idea that it is not the object but the name that creates desire, it is not the dream but the meaning that sells. Therefore, the garments convey what the wearer wishes and signifies a position of social class, denoting that punks use symbols on garments to act as a signifier for their dissatisfaction and rebellious attitudes as working class youths. Thus, it can be true to say that fashion garments are intended to convey and communicate the language of the wearer, and with a united front, punks manage to convey a widespread message through a veil of images, of reasons, of meanings. If this is the case, the onlookers will subconsciously assume what is imposed as signified to be true. However, when relating this idea to punks, it wasn't what they expressed through their garments, but what was written about them that onlookers saw to be true, showing that the true value behind an object or individual is an entirely elusive concept. My dad's friend identified as a punk from 18 years old and still dresses in punk fashions to this day. His hair is a giant mohawk dyed pink at its edges, and he wears embellished and hand-painted leather jackets, suggesting that punk is his way of life and a style he revels in. He says, well, that jacket originally cost me 60 quid from a shop in Camden, showing that punks still access the normal retail stores and that leather was a material used in many wardrobes, not just punks. He then goes on to say, I started to mess with it and get some influence from other punks, denoting that there was a fun spontaneity and self-expression from decorating his own belongings. In addition, it shows that there wasn't a particular aim to be perceived in a certain way by society. However, perhaps this messing with it was to have a punk edge of creativity and freedom. The jacket features the anarchy symbol, hand painting of band names, along with chains, pins, studs, and safety pins, creating an idea that he was transforming this jacket that was part of society's norms into an iconography of what he saw as punk. By being influenced by other punks, it suggests that there could have been limited self-expression and perhaps an expectation of being a punk and having to admit a certain attitude from the clothing that was worn. Another aspect of these add-ons to clothing were that punks used them for defense. McGowan, in his book, A Drink with Shane McGowan, writes that after joining the punk community, he faced regular violence from outsiders, recalling that punks were not afraid to fight back with anything they could, including the dog chains and knives they wore. A punk openly admitting that there were acts of brutal violence also confirms that punks were the victims of being attacked in the first place, while showing that fashion was not only used as a creative expression, but also as a defense mechanism to store weaponry. Hebdige, in Subcultures, explores the idea of style as a form of refusal and revolt, with particular reference to punks who he describes as alternatively dismissed, denounced, and canonized. And it's interesting to read on how mundane objects such as the safety pin take on a symbolic dimension to become a form of disgrace. It is these objects which initiate a double meaning that signifies the tension between dominant and subordinate groups, as these subordinates appropriate simple objects and make them carry secret meanings. The safety pin, for example, was an object used to hold together ragged, ripped clothing and to affix patches, but quickly became codified to punks. Style in subculture is then defying against nature and interrupts the process of the ordinary. It is this that kickstarts visual disgust towards punks, as they use gestures to move towards speech in order to offend the silent majority and challenge the principle of unity and cohesion. Hebdige highlights the symbolic violation of social order that attracts attention and provokes censure, and discusses that punk's appropriation from a wide range of diverse youth styles resulted in a mix that was fairly unstable, as all these elements constantly threatened to separate and return to their original sources. The subcultures need and want to use fashion to detach itself, and underlying such ardent disapproval plays on the idea that consumers are often very deliberate, knowing, and purposeful. They actively decide certain consumption practices for particular reasons and to achieve certain outcomes. Thus, the disruption of a transient society causes this particular youth style to deteriorate perhaps more than any other subculture, mainly due to the idea that they were averting change through garments and humble objects that the public saw as normalization. This meant that controversial slogans were not reciprocated well by societies and communities, and instead they were repulsed by the imagery that was signified by punk garments. To the masses, these acts of abnormalities were a presence of sinister difference, and so depended on the media to confirm their fears as a signifier of sanity. Barth identifies a flaw with the fashion system by explaining that when a description accompanies a photograph, from that description it gets its structural unity. Focusing on this ideology in relation to the subculture, the media initiated a snowball effect by continuously writing about punks. Certainly played a role by choosing to repeat the same words and phrases until punk became synonymous with anarchy and violence. Whether negative or not, their fashion became far more consistent because of it, and began defining a sole image of what punk was. It could also be mentioned that the written words on their clothing perhaps controlled the negative perceptions, and was the reason punks had recognition for violence and destruction. Because without discourse, there is no total fashion, no essential fashion. After visiting the Bishopsgate Institute archive on 30th of October 2019, I read through the diary dating from 1979 until 1983 of Philip Munnick, aka Captain Zip, a punk. It gave me insight into what being a punk day to day was really like. Whilst he wrote political quotes such as "this planet will get nowhere while the talented are prevented from ascending," I was astounded to see his descriptions of the punk clothing he wore and how it made him feel wearing them, demonstrating that clothing was much more than being an expression of violence, but also an expression of the self. The style of a paralysed look and petrified quality found a silent vote in the smooth moulded surfaces of rubber and plastic, in the bondage and robotics which signify punk to the world. Philip Munnick wrote in his diary about wearing rubber pants for several days because they were comfortable, thereby suggestive that punk fashion found refuge in the strange and diurnal desires. By combining both qualities, they established their own out-of-the-ordinary order, to be able to act like normal people while showboating these creative and clashing appearances. Barnard argues that what is important is the person, or the real person, beneath or behind the mask of fashion, raising two ideas about fashion in regards to punks. The first being that if their fashions are a mask, then what do we expect to see of the real person, and was what they stood for a part of their costume? The violence and the destruction acting as an outer shell, while those youths hidden underneath were normal people? I think garments can act, as Barth theorises, as a signifier for what a person wants to communicate. However, I'm not convinced that fashion acts solely as a mask, but it's more complex. If we consider this, then are we witnessing punks reflecting an association with violence as part of their inner self, or this mask could have been used as a defence mechanism to keep the masses from approaching them? The intriguing part of punk fashion is that it seemed to entice people to start on them, and could have become a caricature of what viewers expected them to be. Without a mask, this would simply mean that social order has gone out of the window, and what is left is a purpose for fashion to mirror our own selves. It's important to touch on punk fashion in relation to the 21st century, because we could admit that punk heritage is most noticeable within today's fashion industry, with leather jackets decorated in studs having become a trendy garment. And although these trends are particularly targeted towards our current youth culture, the trend has still transcended to older generations. Particularly when looking at high-end fashion, household name brands have produced a washed-down version of a punk product that would have once been tattered and nostalgic. With modernised interpretations of punk within the fashion industry, it has become normal to see a mashup of people who admire punk style and the true punks who push the stereotype punk to the extreme to make it blatant who they are. And this shows that punks may still slip into the error of feeling that they must dress and act in a certain way in order to be read as punk. Overall, the idea of punk violence has fallen, and that is because punk is perceived as a dying culture. However, their iconography has been taken to couture and fast fashion brands, so it is important to understand what punk was about, to know the contextual references of these contemporary designs. Yeah, that's everything. Sorry about that.
That was absolutely amazing. That was such a kind of visually stimulating method of presentation as well. Really, really enjoyed that, and just such a wealth of fascinating ideas. Okay, so thank you so much, Megan. We've now got we now move into our Q&A discussion section of time, and everyone's done kind of brilliantly with time, so we've got space for that. So if I could ask the panelists, the people who have spoken today, if you wouldn't mind putting your videos on, if you're happy to. If you'd rather not, then don't worry. But if you're happy to, that would be great, so that we've got everybody there. Chien-Tzu, perhaps if you want to have your video on. If not, then you can just have your mic. So amazing. Thank you so much. Such different and contrasting papers in many ways, and it's kind of interesting coming under this broader category of materiality, ethics, sustainability. But I'd be very interested to know what the audience here thinks. But I just felt like there were so many fascinating resonances and things. I took a million notes because I just was so interested in all your research. But there were such lovely ideas of perception kind of coming through the whole time in all of your research. And I was thinking there's kind of perception between objects, perception lost, ideas of illusion and interface in Chien-Tzu's paper. Then we had Luke thinking about kind of existential links between objects. There were traces, how you make things visible, how you make things kind of material, whether things are opaque, how they're constructed, thinking about animation. And then Victoria with the ruins, we kind of saw ideas of decay. You used that lovely word palimpsest, thinking of how layers kind of build on top of one another. And then we had with Yu Ting that again, that was kind of layers and kind of new perceptions, kind of using older objects and bringing them into a whole new context, and that very much in the workshop scenario. And then linking to Megan, I was kind of thinking, well, actually it's perception again. Again, it's this kind of layering. You were bringing these wonderful references in about semiotics and Barth, and thinking about ways of challenging social order, consumption. I loved what you said about media as a signifier of sanity, these kind of structural unities. Again, these kind of changing perceptions, the kind of thing versus how it is perceived. And that really seemed to come up with all of you. And I found that really fascinating, even though they're such completely different territories. I kind of think you should all write a book together. And this is why it's so great seeing people from different disciplines coming together. So if anybody would like to ask a question, we can either use the chat to put some questions to speakers, or if you would like to unmute yourself and put your video on, that would be very welcome. Any questions?
I had a question for Luke, which I kind of popped into the chat as you were talking. So I was kind of really one of the last panel that I was in was about sort of the digital and technological futures, and I was very interested, like in a way, the strategies that you were looking at, they, you know, to kind of create this kind of documentary reflexivity. in a sense, they kind of push this sort of indexical aspect that actually we see the materiality of the films and its process and its history. So in a sense, we sort of have a sort of a sense of what it is and what it means. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about whether that's something that can only be done in kind of these old physical media with kind of film which decays, or whether there are also kind of digital versions of that as well, and whether that's sort of something you're interested in or that you've been thinking about.
Sure. So I think it is definitely something that can be applied to digital media. I mean, in fact, one of the things I was thinking about when it came to sort of modern examples of that reflexivity is you get those kind of behind the scenes extras to documentaries that you see afterwards, showing how it was shot and breaking down how the actual footage was put together and made. In terms of like digital maybe constructions or animation, I haven't looked into that, but that is a really interesting topic because so much of our media today is potentially using some of that digital animation or adjustments or CG because it's so easy to do and it's so accessible. But perhaps that kind of accessibility, the fact that we all have access to all this software nowadays, means that people are more likely to know how things are made. At least that's the hope. For example, if I watch things, I can tell that was keyed in After Effects, or I can see the Photoshop animation in that. But yeah, it's definitely a topic that I didn't do too much research into, the digital aspect, but I think that's the next step. That's kind of where this research would go into the future, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I know I was thinking of when you were speaking as well, whether I guess that's kind of moving into the digital, but thinking about things like the uncanny valley and kind of the strangeness of something being real, unreal, the dinosaurs and things like that. Any other questions? Quite a quiet audience here. Alberto.
You can rely on me on not being too quiet. Here I am. I'm sorry for everyone else, and I have questions for everyone, but because I want to follow up with what Luke just asked, I'm going to bring back the other Luke. So Luke, in terms of this boundaries between realities and perceptions, the main issue that grants us the legitimacy of a certain reality as seen from human eyes, which is the documentary, gives us that reassurance that what we are seeing has been witnessed by a human, and therefore which seems to refer to that transfer that says from a human eye to another human eye. But increasingly, artificial intelligence, and we connect to what we talked about before, shows us not what the human eye sees, but a machinic eye. So in a sense, the whole technology of driverless cars relies on lidar scanners, which are essentially a non-human eye that describes space in a way that the machine sees it. So when we then see what the machine has seen, we come to realize how difficult that concept of realities can be brought back together, because it's not an experience that we will ever have. We will never see the world like the lidar scan of a driverless car see it, but we see the evidence of that reality. And you know, and with the lidar scan now becoming like mainstream, is in the new iPad Pro, you have a lidar scan as in the camera. So these ways of seeing the reality to this particular reproductions will become more and more. So how do we confront these boundaries that you're so well defined as we're entering in a situation where more and more the world will be described not by human observation, but by machinic observation, that then comes back to give us a sense of the reality that we need to survive?
That's a really good question. Stuff to do with AI is really interesting because it all involves a kind of maybe new language that people have to form, a new way of communicating between data and humans, because of course we are still animals. We're still completely based on the senses we have, and yet we need or have developed ways of seeing the world through machines in different ways. I guess it's really important when people construct how that is then visualized back to people, to make it, I don't know, to be, at least from my research, to be aware that what you're seeing is not necessarily how it exists. For example, when you see photos of, people take photos of nebulas in space, and often it's collated footage from things like, different forms of light that we can't even see. But maybe people aren't aware that those photos are not actually how space looks. It's how a certain computer screens can see it. So I think it's difficult, but there's the two things: you have to be very aware and make people educated in terms of how this information is being transformed. But also it's quite exciting because it allows you to see new things, of course, that we can't see otherwise. So I don't know, that's very much on the forefront of technology. So that's quite hard to maybe answer, but I think it's based in the way it's communicated and making clear how it's communicated, that code, because oftentimes you can just get sort of lost in letting the computer do everything. Knowing how it actually functions and how it works and how that translation happens is, I think, really important.
So you're talking about literacy, essentially.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I hope that, again, things like the fact that we have access to so much technology now ourselves, personally, means that people are perhaps more literate in effects and how things are transported. But it's quite hard. It's a good question. It's quite hard to answer.
Alberto is always going to ask a good, big, meaty question. So there's a few things coming up as well in the chat. I think the other Luke White has said a couple of times that he thinks Luke Ramsey would like Chris Marker, particularly his documentary Sans Soleil, and thinking about sort of games, technology, video processing, and then comparing that to Chien-Tzu's beautiful film, which we all really enjoyed at the beginning. I guess, does anyone else have one thing I kind of was interested in knowing is where, I think often when you get to this kind of incredible point in your third year research where you've been fully submerged and immersed, and now suddenly it all kind of comes together and you get that clarity, you feel like, okay, here it is. And I think we're really lucky to sort of hear you all at that stage. Is there something that you got to the end of your research process and thought, I would love to now go into this? Is there a particular aspect or a particular thing that you felt that you either didn't get to look at kind of as much as you'd like to, or that came out at the very end of this research process that you're thinking, now I'd like to jump into that? I wonder if any of you have that kind of feeling.
So with my final collection, it was nothing to do with punk, but I really took on the sort of DIY upcycling stage. It was based on my grandma and like reusing her knits in menswear. I think it would be nice to kind of go from the design aspect to incorporate punk attitude and like a symbolism of punk within the garments, whilst also my aesthetic very like obvious. I think it would be nice in the design route with that. Punk's not something.
That's a fascinating idea. Are you when you were sharing the contemporary collections and that kind of manifestation of punk, where it's, as you said, it's lost the kind of signification of its idea of rebellion and kind of early countercultural movements, but it's become something more manufactured. How do you but what you just said there is, how do you get that kind of feeling of punk, that ethos of punk?
I think from like my research, it was clear that you buying a garment like from a store that's been manufactured to look a certain way is never going to do justice. It's always this sort of messy process that they go through to really like put themselves in that garment. And I think that's how you achieve it, is that every garment shouldn't look the same. It should all have its own identity.
That's really nice. And it's this kind of lived experience, which really comes back to the very method you used for your research process, which was like the narrative that you found in Bishopsgate, or kind of speaking to your, was it your dad's friend, and that kind of, yeah, such an important part of that. Sorry?
His mohawk's gone all red now.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, exactly. So how do, yeah, so it's slightly kind of intangible, isn't it? And actually something that came up in all your papers was this idea of traces, whether that was kind of in ruins or light, or whether it was for you the kind of these pieces of punk, that how do you kind of find these traces in your work? Anyone else want to say anything about where they're hungering to go next, or something that came out at the very end that they'd like to take forward?
Yeah, I would like to talk about, like, when I'm doing my project, I found out a movement about art and craft movement, and this really, like, I think it's really interesting for me, like, to look into art and craft movement, because like, people tend to differentiate, like, art and craft is a different thing, but I think that it's not, like, necessarily you have to, like, separate it into, like, two things. And for my project, that I include, like, craft into art and into, like, social kind of practice. And yeah, and the art and craft movement was started is because, like, because of the revolution of machine taking over human power, something like that, like craftsmanship. Yeah, so I think it's quite interesting, like, to connect my project with, like, art and craft movement.
That's a fascinating idea. Yeah, because in a way what you're doing is yes, as you say, arts and crafts movements kind of working as a sort of anti-industrialization, and trying to bring, as you say, kind of the role of the hand and making, and those sorts of craft principles, which obviously you're perpetuating, but you're using mass constructed objects to which is really interesting. And one of the questions that came up from Emma in the chat was whether you're thinking about taking the workshops to different age groups. She was saying that sort of her parents' generation would particularly like that, kind of older generations. Are you going to continue with the workshops?
Yeah, of course, like, because I think it's because of, like, this situation. Bookshop is not only, like, you can do it face to face, but also, like, through online. So I think an online workshop is a very good way to, like, do, but I'm not sure, like, maybe for the elders it's quite hard for them to, not everyone have the access to internet. I'm not sure.
That's true. That's true.
So
yeah,
I will consider it.
Yeah, that's very true. You've created a very accessible video and a kind of open source pattern in some ways, but yes, as you say, that its dissemination might depend on access. We've got a question. So Emma would really like to ask do you want to ask that out loud, Emma, or are you happy for me to read it?
I can ask it out loud if you'd like. I'm trying to think, because all the presentations we've seen are so beautiful. I've been totally mesmerized by the images and the sounds, the kind of stories that I hear coming across. And especially thinking of the way that Luke has talked about the materiality of film and the traces of the physical object kind of betraying the filmic product itself, and then thinking of Megan's discussion points about the materiality of her father's friend's jacket, and also that wonderful story about going to the archives in the Bishopsgate Institute. Like, it's everything all the speakers have said is so embedded in materiality, and I'm just wondering how their experience of research and practice has been altered by their experiences in lockdown. Like, when we're away from archives and we're away from physical things that we can touch and stuff like that, has lockdown kind of changed your ideas about your research project at all?
Maybe we could hear if Chien-Tzu or Victoria, if you're happy to maybe answer that first, since if you'd like to.
I think my project.
We've got two at the same time. So we go Chien-Tzu and then Victoria. Perhaps we'll go that way.
Probably okay. I probably can talk about it. I think this lockdown is, like, literally changed a lot of like the way we're creating project, especially my project is based on like photography, a little bit like filming the cities. So because the quality of my films is not really good, I was planning to do that like filming the city one more time, but the lockdown just happened. So I just literally like trying to use another way, probably like put a lot of effects or something like into my work, so that people won't notice that too much about the quality of my video, etc. I think I think the virtual platform is a little bit like change our behavior. Like especially like a few days ago, I had a meeting with my writing tutor Regina, and we got a meeting, but it's like I don't know, it's just trying to. It's a little bit like you have to focus on because the like time difference, so we just have to like arrange a lot of things like through different like time zone, because I have my like, for example, I still have to like discuss with my project with my friend as well, but we got like different time zones, so it's a little bit complicated to like arrange it. So just like change a lot of behaviors of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where are you based right now?
I'm in Taiwan at the moment, so it's like 10:47
Okay,
p.m.
well
Yeah.
done. Thank you. Yeah, so are you still going out and filming?
No, I think London's life is not like literally gonna like change back probably in a few months, and I'm already back to my hometown, so probably
Okay.
that just like keep being the platform like with my previous recording.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Victoria, you were going to add to that.
I think that the subject of sustainability, especially during these times, is even more important, because we have time to look around and analyze the space which surround us. And also, I think it's important to learn to protect things instead of just consume. And in general, I think not just for designers and architects, for everybody, it's a great time to explore possibilities, alternatives, and the way of explore ideas, especially with social distancing and so on. So I think it's a good time to think sustainably and maybe to change our way of thinking and focus on everything instead of just consumerism.
Yeah, our sort of use of resources has shifted in some ways, hasn't it? I suppose in terms of fossil fuels and things like that, massively. But in terms of takeaway containers and things, we've kind of probably using up lots of those. But I think I really loved what you said about death being essential in the building, and that idea of actually you were talking about this idea that ruin and the kind of use of ruin is a natural part of the cycle of the building and a natural part of the kind of cycle of the body. And that comes back to these ideas of sustainability, lifespan of something. Its kind of material lifespan. Anyone else want to add to this question or have any other thoughts they want to add? Or does anyone in the audience have anything else they wanted to ask our panelists? Anything else coming up? Okay, well, if not, if that's everything, unless any of the speakers would like to add any other points, then I think we'll say thank you so much. That was really, really fascinating, really enjoyable. Thank you for presenting your research to us. We are amazed and delighted, and you're just incredible students who really have produced amazing stuff. So well done. And yeah, so feel free to, we've now got at 4:10, we've got Peter Thomas, who's in the room with us right now, is doing the keynote lecture on writing research and studio practice, enriching dialectic of interdisciplinarity, looking at his work, and as well as kind of wider thoughts around research and practice. So do come back for that if you'd like to. And I think that's a slightly different link, which you should have. But apart from that, thank you so much, everybody. Well done.